You're sitting in a packed Charlotte courtroom as the gavel strikes, its echo slicing through the tension like a blade. Every eye turns toward the defendant's table. D. Carlos Brown Jr., the man convicted of stabbing 23-year-old Arena Zerutska on a city light rail train, stands motionless as the judge delivers the words, "No one can forget. The sentence of this court is death." A hush falls over the room. Reporters stop scribbling. Family members clutch each other's hands. Yet Brown's face barely shifts. No flinch, no plea, no visible fear. Just a vacant stare that unsettles even the most seasoned observers. Court officers describe a stillness that felt almost unnatural. One deputy later recounted that it was like he was watching someone else's trial. Jurors who had returned the capital verdict only hours earlier look on, some with folded arms, others refusing to meet his eyes. The prosecutor, standing a few feet away, maintains a steady posture, but later admits the lack of emotion was more chilling than any outburst could have been. This hearing follows weeks of gripping testimony and graphic evidence of the attack that ended Rryna's life. Surveillance video had already shown jurors how Brown, seated quietly behind her on the train, unfolded a pocket knife and struck 3 times without warning. Now the final chapter of the state case unfolds under fluorescent lights and heavy security, with the judge reading each legal citation that authorizes the ultimate punishment. As the sentence is pronounced, the courtroom air feels heavier. Rryna's friends weep softly. Her parents remain silent, their grief etched in every movement. Brown, shackled at the wrists, simply nods once before being led away. Observers whisper afterward that the absence of remorse raised deeper questions about what, if anything, he understood in that moment. And now people are wondering if you had been seated only a few rows behind him, watching that eerie calm as a life or death judgment fell. Would you have spoken out or stayed silent? The silence of that sentencing still lingers as details of the crime remind everyone why the courtroom was filled to capacity. On the night of August 22, 2025, Arena Zerutska boarded Charlotte's Blue Line light rail after finishing a long shift at a neighborhood pizzeria. Security footage shows her in her work uniform, settling into a seat near the middle of the car. 4 minutes later, D. Carlos Brown Jr. stepped on board. He sat directly behind her, hood up, expression blank. Passengers recalled nothing unusual, no words exchanged, no warning signs, until Brown slowly reached into his pocket. Investigators say he opened a folding knife and in one swift motion plunged it into Rryna's neck 3 times. Riders screamed as she collapsed forward, her phone slipping from her hand. Brown walked off at the next station, blood visible on the blade, and disappeared into the night. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but Rryna's injuries were fatal before the train even stopped. Authorities captured Brown hours later after a citywide alert and reviewed a history that made the attack feel grimly predictable. Court records reveal more than a decade of arrest for armed robbery, breaking and entering, and other violent offenses. Family members had repeatedly begged judges to place him in long-term psychiatric care, citing schizophrenia and delusions about government chips in his body. But each plea was met with temporary evaluations and quick releases, including a January 2025 incident, when he was freed on a written promise to appear despite a pattern of failing to return to court. Prosecutors emphasized these warnings during trial, presenting a timeline of missed opportunities and underscoring how a revolving door system left Brown free that night. Jurors watched the surveillance video in silence, some covering their mouths as the unprovoked stabbing played out in real time. The footage became the case's most damning witness, leaving little doubt about premeditation or intent. And now people are wondering, if you had known a stranger with such a violent past, and untreated mental illness was repeatedly released back into your community, would you have spoken up sooner or assumed the system would protect you? While the murder itself was swift and shocking, the legal fallout revealed just how complicated this case had become. Only weeks after the attack, the U.S. Department of Justice announced that Brown would also face federal charges under a statute meant to protect passengers on public transportation from violent acts. Prosecutors explained that this was more than a simple homicide, it was an assault on the public's sense of safety. "This is a terroristic act," one federal attorney told reporters, "meant to make people afraid to go about their daily lives." The charge carries a maximum penalty of life in prison or even another death sentence, creating 2 separate tracks of prosecution that could each lead to the ultimate punishment. In their statement, federal officials described how the attack had already begun to change behavior across Charlotte. Ridership on the Blue Line dropped in the days following the killing. Parks near the light rail emptied earlier than usual, with residents admitting they no longer felt secure after dark. Detectives documented dozens of calls from citizens who said they were afraid to use public transit at all. The crime, they argued, achieved what terrorism seeks, instilling fear and disrupting daily life. Federal prosecutors also pointed to a deeper concern: the the repeated breakdowns that allowed Brown to remain free. They highlighted his extensive record, the long history of psychiatric crises, and the many chances for intervention that were missed. By bringing the case into federal court, they sought to ensure that those failures would not determine the final outcome. "We can't risk another gap," one official said, emphasizing that Brown would remain in custody regardless of the state trial's pace or verdict. And now people are wondering, when a single violent act can shake an entire city's confidence in something as ordinary as riding a train, how far should federal authorities go to guarantee that public spaces remain safe? As the federal case moved forward, attention turned to the woman whose life had been cut short. Arena Zerutska's story captured hearts across the country because it embodied both tragedy and resilience. Friends described her as someone who refused to be defined by hardship. Before coming to the United States, she endured the chaos of war in Ukraine, spending nights in bomb shelters and days wondering if she would survive. When the conflict made daily life unbearable, she chose a daunting path, leaving her family, her culture, and the only home she had known to begin again in a foreign country. Charlotte offered that chance. Within days of receiving a work permit, Rryna secured multiple jobs. She helped elderly residents at a senior center, worked shifts at a local pizzeria, and even volunteered to care for neighbors' pets. Friends said she rarely complained, instead greeting each challenge with quiet determination. Her partner recalled that she dreamed of eventually opening her own art restoration studio, using the degree she had earned back home. She wanted to give back to the place that gave her a second life, a coworker said. The family's decision after her death revealed how deeply Rryna had embraced her new country. When the Ukrainian embassy offered to assist in returning her body, her relatives declined, saying she loved America and should be laid to rest in the nation she had chosen. Local residents attended her memorial service in overwhelming numbers, many of them strangers who had followed the case and felt compelled to honor her. Mourners left flowers at the light rail station, transforming the platform into a sea of candles and handwritten notes. That devotion underscored the human cost of the crime. Rryna was not simply a victim on a police report. She was a young woman rebuilding her life with extraordinary courage. And now people are wondering, when someone risks everything to start anew and is taken so suddenly, how should a community ensure her legacy is remembered beyond the headlines? While the community honored Rryna's life, investigators dug deeper into the man responsible, revealing a pattern of warnings that seemed impossible to ignore. Records show that D. Carlos Brown Jr. had been arrested at least 14 times since 2009 for offenses ranging from armed robbery to breaking and entering. Several of those arrests involved violent conduct, yet many charges were dismissed or ended with brief sentences. Time and again, Brown was released with minimal supervision, only to resurface in new police reports months later. Family members had long recognized the danger. His mother, Michelle Ditt, described a steady unraveling after Brown's 2020 release from prison. She recounted sleepless nights filled with slammed doors and muffled conversations as he talked to voices no one else could hear. His sister tried repeatedly to secure involuntary psychiatric treatment, presenting judges with documentation of paranoid delusions, claims that a government chip controlled his actions, that invisible materials in his body forced him to lash out. Despite these pleas, court after court refused to order long-term care, citing limits under state law and Brown's own refusal to take medication. One missed opportunity stood out. In January 2025, Brown was arrested for abusing 911 after making dozens of calls about the imagined chip. Instead of a mandatory hold, he was released on a written promise to appear in court, despite a record of skipping previous hearings. Even a July incident involving an attack on his sister led only to a delayed competency evaluation that never took place before Rryna's murder. These lapses became central at trial. Prosecutors methodically outlined how each release represented a decision point, each one a chance to prevent tragedy. Jurors listened as the list of failures stretched across years, creating an unbroken chain from early warning signs to the deadly night on the blue line. And now people are wondering, if every red flag was visible to family, police, and judges alike, how can a justice system claim to protect the public when it repeatedly opens the door for violence to strike again? The revelations about Brown's past forced an uncomfortable discussion about the intersection of severe mental illness and violent crime. Court documents confirm a long history of schizophrenia, marked by auditory hallucinations and delusional beliefs that materials inside his body dictated his behavior. In recorded jail calls after the attack, he rambled about implanted devices and accused his own relatives of being part of a conspiracy. Yet he also acknowledged the stabbing, telling his sister that he hurt his hand while stabbing Rryna, a statement that prosecutors highlighted as proof he understood the violence he committed. Before the state trial concluded, the court ordered a 60-day mental health evaluation to determine if Brown was competent to stand trial on the federal charges. Under U.S. law, a defendant must comprehend the proceedings and assist in their defense to face judgment. Experts warned that such evaluations can take months, even a year, especially when treatment is required before a meaningful assessment can be completed. Meanwhile, prosecutors insisted public safety could not wait, stressing that Brown would remain behind bars or under secure medical supervision regardless of the evaluation's pace. This debate split public opinion. Some mental health advocates argued that executing a man with severe schizophrenia would be a moral failure, pointing to systemic gaps in care that left him untreated for years. Others countered that the calculated nature of the attack, quietly opening the knife, positioning himself, and striking with precision, demonstrated enough awareness to justify the harshest penalty. The surveillance footage, they said, revealed planning inconsistent with total incapacity. Families who ride the Blue Line daily voiced a different concern: the larger system that allowed Brown to board the train at all. Parents told reporters they now avoid public transit with their children, while commuters described a lingering unease even after added security patrols. And now people are wondering, when someone with a documented mental illness commits a crime so deliberate and devastating, should the priority be treatment, punishment, or something in between? And who gets to decide where that line is drawn? As hearings continue in both state and federal court, the case of Arena Zerutska has become a mirror reflecting broader flaws in the American justice system. Her murder was not an isolated event. It was the endpoint of years of missed warnings, strained mental health services, and courtroom decisions that repeatedly sent a dangerous man back onto the streets. Investigators now cite this tragedy when calling for reforms that include stricter involuntary treatment laws, better tracking of violent repeat offenders, and closer cooperation between state and federal agencies when public safety is at risk. Charlotte residents have turned grief into action. Vigils at light rail stations continue weekly, drawing commuters who once shared trains with Rryna. Local leaders debate new security measures, from expanded surveillance to dedicated transit police units. Advocacy groups use her name to push for stronger mental health funding, arguing that prevention must happen long before a knife is drawn. Across social media, thousands share the hashtag bearing her name, demanding accountability not only for Brown, but for every institutional failure that left Rryna unprotected. Legal experts note that the dual prosecutions, state for first-degree murder and federal for violence on a mass transportation system, are rare and signal the government's intent to secure a punishment that cannot be undone by appeals or procedural errors. Whether the outcome is life imprisonment, execution, or indefinite psychiatric commitment, Brown will never again walk the streets of Charlotte. Yet for many, that assurance offers little comfort compared to the life already lost. Rryna's story continues to resonate because it captures both the promise and the fragility of starting over. She survived war, built a new life in a new country, and gave back to her community in ways that friends and coworkers still celebrate. Her name now stands as both a warning and a call to action, a reminder of what can happen when systems meant to protect instead allow tragedy to unfold. And now people are wondering, after witnessing every missed signal and every delayed decision, do you believe the justice system can truly change? Or will the lessons of Arena Zerutska's death fade until the next preventable tragedy forces